This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Glynn Tonsor, K-State livestock economist, begins the show with an update on the cattle market and reminders about consumers' continued demand for beef. The show keeps going with Antonina Broyaka, K-State Extension Associate in the Department of Agricultural Economics, as she provides the show with an update on Ukraine crops and their production. K-State's Rodrigo Onofre and Kansas Grain Sorghum's Maddy Meier wrap up the show as they preview the Sorghum Connection Winter Series and what learning opportunities are available. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Monday show with the cattle market update from K-State livestock economist Glynn Tonsor. Glynn, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure, and good morning, Shelby.
Glenn, what are we seeing for the cattle market?
So you and I were talking Monday morning. This past week was another, I call it rough week on balance, when I put a bow on Monday through Friday. And some of the challenges carried into the weekend. AMS called the fed cattle market at about 229, close on Friday. It's important to note here that weights continue to go up. So there's a lot of discussion about hoof count. We're behind on cattle on feed information. So we missed the last report. So we're working a little bit more blind on that situation than we would like. But I want to impress on listeners, the most recent slaughter weights, dressed weights are up more than 50 pounds compared to 2023. So the markets are working in the sense they're signaling, trying to put more pounds on the available animals. I want to impress on folks up front here. When we look over to the feeder cattle market, AMS called the Salina market specifically. The phrase was low volume, sharply lower tone. So $10 to $20 per hundredweight lower, depending on what weight class I might give you. Two example lots, one of them 109 head weighing 622, went for 371. And then a lot slightly heavier at 666 pounds, went for 353. So there was a pullback in the cash market this past week, and it was actually even stronger on the board. So when you look at CME futures contracts, December live cattle was 221, down a full $8 on the week. For some quick context, that's down from about 248 at its little more local peak in the middle of October, specifically October 16th is what I have here in my notes. And we now have the CME contract and levels being roughly at late July, timestamp the magnitude of the pullback. Parallel for feeder cattle, January feeder cattle contract down $13 this past week, down from about 378 that same day, October 16th, and likewise back down to about late July levels.
Are we also seeing some down when we looked at box beef?
We are. Now, not quite the same magnitude, but choice is 376, down about $2 from the prior Friday. It is down about $35 from its peak in August. Select is 361, down to $2.50 this past week. So kind of across the board was a bearish tone this past week. Some of that, I would argue, was sped up by some discussion at the very end of the week on added uncertainty about the broader business environment. But the other would be just the sentiment that's carried over from the last few weeks, which was other versions of those announcements that kind of took the steam out of the cattle market.
And while we're thinking about the cattle market, and you've spoke on it a few different times, and a point you made in one of your articles discussing the meat packing business, and why is that something that you think is important? As you mentioned, we had a rough week for the cattle market.
Yeah, so most of our listeners probably know there was renewed interest in the structure of the beef cattle industry this past week. And the part that was focused on the end of last week was the concentration at the packing processing level. So for some points of clarity for our listeners here, there are 4 entities that indeed do purchase the majority of the cattle and subsequently give us the majority of our wholesale beef here in the U.S. That is a statement I would have said 10 years ago, and I would have said 20 years ago. So that particular comment has not necessarily changed. The exact ownership has changed a little, but not a lot in that story. You got to go back to, I believe it was 2018, when one of those entities had a notable ownership change, but that was one of the 4 that we're alluding to here. So it's not a new kind of a State of the Union comment that there's concentration in the packing processing sector. I think it's useful for folks to back up and kind of a little bit less emotionally try to understand why prices are where they are, what may or may not have changed in the last year, 5 years, 10 years, and so forth. And to that point, this from other discussions we've had, and I've been having lots of the media, is it's a little frustrating to not give credit to the producers and the broader industry that they've made adjustments to meet the consumer demand signals. So meat demand is quite strong, right? And even more narrowly, beef demand was very strong in 2024, first half of 2025. And any good economist is going to tell you that if you have strong demand from consumers, that has a pull factor that pulls prices up in a market. And I would sincerely plead with folks that are listening to this to give credence to the demand component of this discussion, because it's actually a story to celebrate for the industry. Higher quality beef has been encouraged by consumers, and the producers have found ways, start genetics all the way to final marketing and packaging decisions. Everybody in between on team beef, so to speak, is giving the public those products they want. And we shouldn't be surprised that with that, you might have higher prices because it's a consumer demand pull is a key part of that story. Yes, production costs are up. I 100% recognize that, and we can clarify that as well. But it is not just a number of cows in the industry story that sometimes it's getting boiled down to for some simplicity, but that doesn't, give credence to the full story.
And that strong demand that we're seeing from consumers, something we've really seen for quite a while, isn't it?
Yeah. So my favorite phrase, the first, let's say 8-9 months of this year, before the last few weeks have been a little bit more turbulent in lots of ways. But before that was meat is having a moment. And what I really mean by that is protein is having a moment, and meat is one of the favorable ways to give you protein. So to give a shout out here, folks, particularly if you're listening, you have younger folks at home, cottage cheese and other things are in as well. So this is not just a ribeye moment or, pork chop, so forth, but meat is in because protein is highly desired in our country. And the Meat Demand Monitor, which is a project here at K-State, funded by the Beef and Pork Checkoff. For those that aren't familiar with that, everything from it's on our Ag Manager website. Every month we survey over 2,000, now over 3,000 U.S. residents. It is a deep dive into all things domestic meat. We regularly find there's a growing trend in people saying we want to eat meat. Specifically, they self-declare their diet as being an animal, meat consumer. And there's a slow decline in vegan vegetarian rates. Just go full stop on everything and don't even lose ourselves in numbers after that. That itself is supportive of the meat livestock industry because your consumer base is aligning with it, right? And back to my earlier comment, that is demand supportive.
And when we think about our protein and our meat, are the things that people find important staying consistent?
Yes, would be the general comment. And what I mean by that is like the relative order of what's important is consistent over time. And specifically, we have something called protein values. And we ask folks in the MDM, here's a list of 12 things. What are the 4 most important in your protein purchasing decision, or the 4 least? And of course, the 4 you don't pick, I know are in the middle. And taste, freshness, price, and safety are persistently the top ranking. And what I mean by that is the majority of people tell me those are the top 4. Or some mix of those. Conversely, more production practice things. So an environmental impact claim, an origin traceability claim, animal welfare, use or lack of use of antibiotics and hormone-free, those rank quite low. 10 to 20% of the public would put those last 4 items at the top of the list. So they are target markets. I use the term niche market just to kind of characterize. There's business models around that. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's for the minority of U.S. residents, not the majority. The typical, kind of more common, Joe, you run into on the street, taste, freshness, price, and safety is way more likely to be leading the decision. And that's always important to clarify, but it's extra important in the current environment that we're trying to summarize here without being too politically, incorrect in talking about it, is taste is critical to the decision about whether to buy a meat protein or item or not. And actually, for the majority of the U.S., taste outranks price. So I'm an economist. I'm never going to tell you price doesn't matter. But taste is actually more important than price. Regularly, we find that. And is that consistent over time? Yes.
Focusing just real quick on price, what are consumers willing to pay when it comes to proteins?
Every month in the MDM are base reports. And by the way, we're referring to the October report. I should have clarified this up front for our listener, Shelby. We had a delay in getting both the September and the October report posted. That was a shutdown effect. AMS is helping us on that. So I'm not mad at AMS. Don't take the comment that way. But we did have a delay. Now they are up. But what you're asking me about is the willingness to pay numbers. And to put a bow on it is meat demand in October relative to September. And by the way, October compared to October 2024 as well. So whether we're doing month over month or year over year, we had an additional increase in retail. So grocery store for at-home consumption. So people are willing to pay more for those products than they were a month ago, and they're willing to pay more than they were a year ago. That's consistent with this, like favorable, broader demand environment. The food service channel, which we also track in the MDM, is a little bit more of a mixed bag. So there is some examples of growth, but it's not quite as clear. Foot traffic in particular, people going to restaurants, is a little softer than it was before. I think that's a macroeconomic concern that's been there for some time. The government shutdown and related effects probably are magnified that in the last 6-8 weeks. Food service demand is okay, not great. Retail demand's been quite good.
So, Glynn, as we look at the end of 2025, what are you keeping an eye on, or what point do you really want to hit home with our cattle producers?
So, yeah, I've been impressing on folks, compare ourselves now to, say, a month ago. So let's get before the most recent turbulent times. There's been a full $200, in some cases $300 per head feeder cattle, fed cattle pullback. And that is real, right? I'm never going to ignore that. It's kind of my job to let the data speak and describe that. And I get that. But I would impress on us that that's coming on the heels of a very strong run up. And a lot of markets take a pause anyhow, maybe not that magnitude of a pullback, but nonetheless, a pause, some might have seen it coming, right? But the core aspects of the supply situation, how many animals we have and the fact the industry is trying to put more pounds on each of them has not changed. In my best assessment, the core of the demand story hasn't changed. That's why I'm driving home the MDM points is the public still says taste is leading and they want meat protein. The broader kind of business environment, what the international trade environment might look like and so forth, has probably ratcheted up in uncertainty in the last 3-4 weeks. That part is certainly rattled the markets, but a lot of the core base fundamentals haven't changed. And I think it's important for us to pause and reflect on that. And I hope we actually are quote unquote in the news less the next few months and those base fundamentals play out.
Glynn, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thanks for having me on, Shelby.
That was K-State livestock economist Glynn Tonsor. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show with an update on the Ukraine and Black Sea region from K-State Extension Associate in the Department of Agricultural Economics, Antonina Broyaka.
So in 2025, Ukraine has planted almost 7% more of total grain and legumes crops, as some land was returned to cultivation. Approximately 460,000 hectares were returned to cultivation. It's not too much, but still gives opportunity to produce more. So far, around 74% of planted area is harvested, and corn, soybeans, and sunflower are still in progress. So the yield, unfortunately, lowering for many crops as soil is getting exhausted, farmers having limited access to finance, inputs, and machineries, as well as obviously agroecological calendar not always can be followed due to the war. So let's take a look on 2025 compared to 2024. So due to not enough moisture in soil, during last winter, which was almost without snow, very unusual for Ukraine, the yields are lower, but also this is the impact of lower fertilizer application rate. Of course, no snow good for soldiers, and another winter is coming, and Russia again attacking all power plants in Ukraine badly. And we had again several blackouts, but we're still keeping moving, right? So as for now, we see that average yields are 8% lower than last year, and the biggest actually decline is in oilseeds crops.
Antonina highlights how things have changed over the past few years.
If we compare 23, 22, 24, the application of fertilizers at least 35% lower than before the war. And of course, this would impact yields, and that involves all types of organic and inorganic fertilizer, all the nitrogen, potash, phosphate, everything is decreasing. So in 2025, what I know that Ukraine imported more fertilizers than last year, but fertilizers are getting more and more expensive. So I'm not sure that farmers would apply more this year as they did last year. So when I have more data, I of course will share with you regarding fertilizer application.
She continues her conversation as she discusses production for Ukraine.
A decrease in yield leads to a decrease in production. The total harvest of grain and oilseeds in Ukraine is expected this year around 73.5 million tons, 5% less than previous year, including 54.6 million tons of grain, or minus 3% to the previous year, and 18.8 million tons of oilseeds, or 11% less than in previous year. In 2025, Ukrainian government estimate the harvest very low due to moisture deficit. The harvest of corn is expected on 26 million tons, pretty close to the previous year. So far, 10.4 million tons harvested. We finished harvesting wheat, 22.8 million tons of wheat, pretty much the same as last year and as it was estimated for this year. 5.4 million tons of barley. Ukraine harvested 3.3 million tons of rapeseed. That is less than last year and less than expected, but it's still higher than before the war. We also expect to harvest 5.4 million tons of soybeans. Initially, it was 5.8. We harvested so far 3.9, lower than expected, but higher than before the war. The expectation for sunflower also were lowered from 11.5 to 10.1 million tons due to unfavorable weather conditions. So far, we harvested 8.4 million tons. A decrease in production leads to a decrease in export estimate. In 25-26 marketing year, experts expect 21 million tons of corn export. In the previous season, Ukraine had, as you can see, pretty high corn export level due to very large ending stocks from the beginning of the war and previous very high yields of 2021. I don't know if you know, Ukraine consumes only around 4.5 million tons of corn annually, so the rest is intended for ag. Wheat export is expected to be between 15 and 16 million tons, barley 2.2 million tons, soybeans 3.7 million tons, rapes is 2.7 million tons, and only 100,000 tons of sunflower seeds, as it is mainly processed into sunflower oil and then exported. So, unlike all other commodities, Ukraine increased production of soybean in 24-25 season, and as a result, a processing and export of soybeans increased. That is one of the most profitable crops right now in Ukraine. So it's plus 42% last marketing year compared to the previous. As a result, the export of soybeans increased to 28%. Geography of soybean export is the following: European Union, the majority, almost 43% goes to European Union, 25% to Turkey, then Egypt, Pakistan, Lebanon, Serbia. So at the same time, 25-26 season, soybean from Ukraine is pretty low. As you can see, just 77,000 tons. Soybean oil also production increased almost twice, and this significantly also increased soybean meal export from Ukraine. And you can see how much higher 24-25 were compared to 23-24. Regarding sunflower oil export from Ukraine for September-August marketing year, that was mainly Europe, but also you can see mainly Poland actually among European countries. So, but also India, and there is Saudi Arabia, but the rest that would be European countries. Soybean meal exports also goes mainly to Europe, Poland, Hungary, Romania, Spain, Turkey, and here is also Lebanon, which is not Europe, right? Talking about our major destinations of soybeans and soybean meal, which is Europe mainly, again, we can see a decline since introduction of new quotas, and August, September is very low, and here August, September is very low, meaning that this impact, those quotas impact definitely European trade with European Union. Talking about prices, since the beginning of new season, the range of prices for wheat is very wide, and Ukrainian wheat is the most expensive still for last few months. It was traded to $33 per ton, followed by Russia to 30, and American wheat was traded 2022, but the difference much smaller now compared to what was going on in August. So one of the reasons why the prices last week kind of increased. So Russia actually introduced some increase in duty, wheat export duty for wheat export from Russia. That was for period from October 29 to November 6, and actually this inclusive increase was 70%. That was Russian ministry mentioned. So to me, that was one of the reasons why it kind of boosted some prices. On a corn market, prices for Ukrainian corn had grown till August here, right, and then dropped. Now it's around 220 per ton. American corn is 204, Argentinian 206.
Once again, that was K-State Extension Associate in the Department of Agricultural Economics, Antonina Broyaka. If you would like to hear her full update on Ukraine and the Black Sea region, you can do so by checking out her webinar, which you can find on AgManager.info. There you can also find slides that go along with her presentation. Of course, it will also be linked on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because we have more for you up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we conclude our Monday show discussing the Sorghum Connection Winter Series with K-State row crop plant pathologist Rodrigo Onofre and Kansas Grain Sorghum Senior Director of Communications, Maddy Meier. Rodrigo, Maddy, thank you both so much for taking the time to join us today.
Yeah, thanks for having us over.
Maddy, what is the Sorghum Connection Winter Series?
Yeah, so this series is a collaboration between the Kansas Grain Sorghum Commission, K-State Research and Extension, and the K-State Department of Plant Pathology. And so these events will be comprehensive winter schools, an educational series, if you will, that will follow the field day events that we hosted earlier this year, where we were fortunate to welcome over 120 sorghum growers across the state. And so we're looking at this additional series of one-day events across central and western Kansas. And really, it's all focused on enhancing the profitability of sorghum producers across the state.
And mentioning educational series, Rodrigo, what will people be able to learn about, and who will they be hearing about it from?
Yeah, well, I'm very excited about the 2025 second year of Sorghum Connection Winter Series, right? So attendees will be receiving valuable data-driven information from our industry leaders from K-State, United Sorghum Checkoff Program, and other universities as well. So, our speakers this year, we're very fortunate to have Dr. Brent Bean, Director of Agronomy from the United Sorghum Checkoff, who will be talking about sorghum management strategies. We'll be bringing in Juan Pinheiro, which is the Extension Dairy Specialist for Texas A&M AgriLife. We'll be talking about enhancing sorghum digestibility for cattle. I know it's a hot topic right now. getting that sorghum into the feed. Next on the line, too, we'll have a grower panel, which will be moderated by Dr. Sarah Sexton-Bowser. I think last year she did a phenomenal job. We had a really good discussion with our growers and in-season management and some of the hot topics at the farm level, right? Then we'll be covering, as part of my program and my master's student funded by the Commission on maximizing sorghum yield and productivity through cropping systems and fungicides and seed treatment and beyond. I think it's a very exciting times. We're finding a lot of new technology to push that yield and productivity as well, right? Dr. Jordan Bell, Associate Professor and Extension Agronomist at Texas A&M AgriLife, as well, will be joining us, and we'll be talking about managing forage sorghum in water-limited silage system, which is again hot topic for our producers out there. Dr. Sarah Lancaster, Extension Weed Scientist here at K-State, will be covering weed management innovations for grain sorghum and weed science strategies, right? How to get that rolling right from the beginning. And the one that I haven't mentioned yet, but it's an exciting times as well. Dr. Deepak Joshi will be talking about drones and sorghum, right? Is there a place for it? What is the latest technology? So the agenda is packed. So I again encourage our producers to be joining us.
As this is a series, Maddy, what are the different locations that this will be taking place?
Yeah, so these events are scheduled for December 3rd at the South Hutchinson Community Building, of course, in Hutchinson, December 4th at the Buffalo Bill Cultural Center in Oakley, and December 5th at the High Plains Feed Yard in Montezuma. And all events will begin at 10 a.m. With registration at 9:30, and we should be wrapping up about 2:30 in the afternoon.
Do people need to register for these events?
Yes, we do recommend RSVPing because space is limited. And I also like to mention that these events are free. And so you can do so by visiting our website. That's ksgrainsorghum.org/sorghum connection. It's right there on our homepage. You can click the link and get registered. So very easy to do so.
Maddy, Rodrigo, I appreciate you both taking the time to join us today.
Thank you.
Shelby.
That was Kansas Grain Sorghum Senior Director of Communications, Maddy Meier, and she was joined by K-State row crop plant pathologist Rodrigo Onofre as they discussed the Sorghum Connection Winter Series. This series is free, however, they do ask that you take the time to RSVP. The first one in this series is taking place on December 3rd in Hutchinson, then on December 4th in Oakley, and then December 5th in Montezuma. I will put a link in today's show notes on agtoday.net where you can RSVP. That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.